In the labyrinths of the human psyche, where shadows dance with light, the act of infidelity emerges not merely as a betrayal of another, but often as a betrayal of oneself. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, delved deep into the complexities of the unconscious mind, revealing that our actions are frequently governed by unseen forces within us. Jung introduced the concept of the shadow, the unconscious part of the personality that the conscious ego does not identify with. This shadow comprises repressed ideas, weaknesses, desires, instincts, and shortcomings. When individuals fail to acknowledge and integrate their shadow, it can manifest in destructive behaviors, including infidelity. Faithful individuals, those who consciously value commitment and loyalty, are not immune to the temptations of the shadow. In fact, their repression of certain desires or aspects of themselves can make them more susceptible. The more one denies the existence of these inner impulses, the more power they gain, eventually erupting in actions that seem out of character. Infidelity, in this context, becomes a symptom of a deeper internal conflictor cry from the unconscious seeking recognition and integration. It's not solely about the allure of another person, but about the parts of oneself that have been neglected or denied. Jung emphasized the importance of individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious parts of the psyche to achieve self-realization. This journey requires confronting the shadow, acknowledging its presence, and embracing it as part of the whole self. When individuals embark on this path of self-discovery, they begin to understand the underlying motivations behind their actions. They recognize that infidelity is not just a moral failing, but a manifestation of unresolved inner turmoil. Through this awareness, they can work towards healing, growth, and genuine transformation. In conclusion, the act of cheating by faithful individuals can be understood through the Jungian lens as an expression of the unacknowledged shadow. By bringing these unconscious elements to light and integrating them, one can move towards wholeness, authenticity, and deeper connections in relationships. Because the betrayal never begins in the bedroom. It begins in the mirror. It begins in the quiet refusal to meet yourself where your longings live, in the subtle shame you swallow, when your inner voice whispers truths that contradict your curated image. Because those who are most faithful on the outside, those who wear the armor of devotion, of discipline, of moral high ground, are often the ones whose inner world is cracking at the seams. Not because they are weak, but because they are split. Split between who they've learned to be and who they secretly are. Split between the roles they perform and the instincts they repress. And the psyche, as Jung told us, has a law stronger than morality. It is the law of wholeness. The unconscious does not care about your promises. It does not care about your loyalty to ideas you've never examined. It will sabotage your success, your marriage, your stability, if that is what it takes to wake you up, to force you to confront the truth that you are not as integrated as you pretend to be. So the affair is rarely about the other person. It is about the part of you you've buried so deep that it had to surface through someone else. It is the shadow knocking on the walls of your carefully constructed self. It says, you've made love a role, not a ritual. You've silenced the hunger that made you human. And if you do not listen, if you do not face the unmet, unlived life within you, it will find a way to act itself out, even if it costs you everything. Because the soul does not bargain with illusions. It doesn't negotiate with repression. It doesn't care how faithful you seem. It only cares how real you are. And this is where we arrive at the brutal, beautiful truth. Cheating, when it comes from the faithful, is almost never a desire to destroy the other. It's a desperate attempt to resurrect the self. It's a fire set, not to burn the house down, but to find warmth after years of emotional frost. Because the unconscious doesn't care if your life looks perfect. It cares if your essence is being lived. If the marriage has become a prison of politeness, if your roles have overtaken your reality, if your truth has been sanitized, civilized, and buried under layers of social expectation. And that buried truth, it doesn't stay quiet forever. It begins to ache. It begins to rot. It begins to knock, first subtly, then loudly, then violently, until one day you find yourself in a hotel room or a text thread or a lingering gaze that breaks the illusion, and you say, I don't know who I've become. But that's not entirely true, is it? You do know. You've become who you were always afraid of being. The one with needs, with edges, with unholy cravings, with wild questions about what it means to feel alive. The one who never disappeared, only went underground, until now. And now that part of you has surfaced, not as a confession, but as a consequence of denying your inner fire in favor of outer control, of trading soul intimacy for predictable companionship, of confusing peace with passivity and fidelity with forgetting yourself. You see, Jung never spoke of the shadow as something evil. He saw it as essential, not the enemy of love, but its gateway, because love without the shadow is not love. It is projection. It is performance. It is a contract signed in fear rather than in full-bodied truth. But when the shadow is welcomed, when you face the parts of you that feel too taboo, too impulsive, too irrational, too real, something changes. You stop needing others to carry your unlived life for you. You stop outsourcing your freedom to the fantasy of forbidden connection. You stop believing that the affair was the answer when it was only ever the messenger. And the message? You are not integrated. You are not whole. You are not living in alignment with your deepest self, not because you're faithless, but because you're fragmented, because you've confused discipline with disconnection, because you've called repression virtue, because somewhere along the line, you forgot that desire is not the enemy of commitment. It is the test of it, not to suppress it, but to witness it, to walk through it, to alchemize it into something true. The goal is not perfection, it's integration. And integration means you don't amputate your desires, you honor them. You don't obey them blindly, but neither do you exile them into the unconscious, where they turn into sabotage. You face them, you learn their language. You ask, what truth are you pointing me toward? Because desire, when met with awareness, is not destructive. It is directive. It tells you where you're not alive, where your relationship has gone numb, where you've collapsed into role, ritual, routine. It tells you that your marriage has become a mausoleum of masks. And now you stand at the edge, not just of fidelity or infidelity, but of a far more important choice. Will you continue performing the self you've outgrown? Or will you step into the terrifying grace of radical self-confrontation? Will you keep loving from a place of suppression? Or begin loving from a place of sovereignty? Because cheating is not the opposite of love. It is the failure of consciousness. It is the shadow screaming, feel me, face me, integrate me, or I will destroy everything you pretend is sacred, just to prove that you are not whole. And if you're listening, if the pain has finally cracked the surface, then this is your chance, not just to repair a relationship, but to become real, not just faithful in form, but faithful in essence, faithful to your truth, faithful to your fire, faithful to the vow beneath the vow, that you will not abandon yourself just to keep the peace. Because peace without presence is just pretense. And commitment without consciousness is a beautifully wrapped coffin for the soul. So now the question isn't, why did they cheat? Or even, can we fix it? The real question is, what within you is asking to be seen? What part of you has never had a voice in the relationship you built? What longing have you disowned so completely that it had to dress itself as betrayal just to be acknowledged? This is not about justifying. This is not about blame. This is about invitation. The invitation to look at yourself, not with judgment, but with radical, raw, Jungian honesty. To ask, where have I split my truth from my performance? Where have I confused loyalty with silence? Where have I abandoned the wild, sacred flame of my own becoming for the illusion of stability? Because until those questions are faced, the patterns will repeat. Different names, different faces, same exile of self, same unconscious dance. But if you're brave, if you stop searching for moral high ground and start searching for meaning, you can use even this rupture as a rite of passage, not just for your marriage, but for your identity. Because betrayal doesn't have to end in destruction. It can begin in integration. It can become the moment you finally bring home every fragmented part of yourself you left outside the gates of faithfulness. And when you do, when you call back the exiled parts, not as enemies, but as teachers, you begin to understand the deeper truth beneath the betrayal, that it was never about breaking a promise. It was about breaking open the shell of performance, breaking open the prison of repression, breaking open the numb routine, masquerading as love. And in that breaking, something ancient stirs. The part of you that remembers what Jung always knew, that love is not just about safety. It is about transformation, not comfort, but confrontation, not the avoidance of desire, but the alchemization of it. And now that the mask has shattered, now that the shadow has spoken, you are left with a sacred choice most never dare to make, to begin again, not as who you were, but as who you truly are, to rebuild not on denial, but on depth, not on fear, but on freedom. Because when you faced your darkness, when you've looked at your desire, not as sin, but a signal, when you've stopped betraying your essence in the name of being good, you don't need to cheat. You don't need to lie. You don't need to run, because you are no longer split. You are whole. And from that wholeness, you can finally love with clean hands, clear eyes, and a soul unafraid of its own truth. And from that truth, love becomes something else entirely. It's no longer a sanctuary for your masks, but a crucible for your becoming. Because when two people face their shadows, when they no longer hide their hunger, but instead hold it in the open, they unlock the kind of intimacy that cannot be touched by temptation. Not because they are beyond desire, but because they are in relationship with it. It no longer controls them. It teaches them And that is a difference between a love that survives and a love that transcends. Survival says, let's bury this and move on. Transcendence says, let's unearth everything we feared and build something truer from the wreckage. Because the truth is, betrayal is not the end. Avoidance is the end. Denial is the end. Pretending you were whole when you were splitting inside, that is the end. But if you meet the moment, if you let the shame burn clean, instead of burying it in silence, then even infidelity can become initiation. Initiation into a deeper fidelity. Fidelity to your essence, to your evolution, to the holy, messy, sacred work of real love, not romanticized, but ritualized. And when you choose that, when you love from integration, not from image, you don't just repair what was broken. You transform it. You burn the old script and write a new vow. Not, I promise never to falter, but I promise to face myself so I can love you in truth. And that vow, that quiet, sacred promise to no longer live divided, it holds more weight than any ceremony ever could, because it's not spoken in front of witnesses. It's spoken in the wreckage. It's whispered in the aftermath. When the fantasy is dead, and all that remains is you, not the version of you that was faithful by force, but the version who is faithful by choice, by awareness, by integration, by a conscious commitment to never again use love as a disguise for self-abandonment. And when two people arrive there, when they shed the masks, stand in the ruin and choose again, not because of who they used to be, but because of who they are now, then they don't just heal, they transcend. Because now love is no longer based on roles, obligations, or unconscious projections. Now love is forged in truth, built on awareness, sealed with the fire of shared awakening. This is the Jungian insight most feared to face. That betrayal doesn't come to end the relationship. It comes to end the illusion. And what survives that death, if you're willing to stay conscious, is something few ever experience. It is not a return to what was. It is the birth of what can only emerge after the shadow has been faced. And that is not just redemption. That is alchemy. That is a kind of love that does not just bind two people together, it frees them into truth, into wholeness, into love that is no longer afraid of the dark, into love that does not run from the unconscious, but welcomes it. Because when you can name your desire, you no longer need to hide it. When you can feel your shadow without judgment, you no longer need to act it out in secret. And when you can bring your full, flawed, radiant self to the altar of relationship and be met with presence instead of punishment, then you have entered sacred territory. You are no longer playing the role of the faithful partner. You are becoming the integrated lover, one who has confronted the darkest corners of their longing, their guilt, their need for freedom, and emerged with clarity. Clarity that says, I will not shrink myself to fit love. I will not betray myself to preserve an image. I will not hide from my desire. I will transform it. And this perhaps is the real purpose behind the pain of betrayal, to awaken you from your performance, to remind you that love is not a costume party. It is a ritual of revelation, where two souls, raw and real, bring their chaos into the light not to destroy each other, but to transmute the unconscious into connection. And when that becomes your standard, when truth replaces role, when presence replaces pretense, when devotion is no longer about avoiding failure, but about becoming whole together, then love no longer asks you to be perfect. It only asks you to be awake. Awake to your cravings, awake to your discomfort, awake to the voices within you that say, this isn't enough, not because you're broken, but because some part of you is still asleep. And when you wake, you realize infidelity was never the disease. It was the diagnosis, a flashing signal that said, somewhere inside, you've gone unconscious. And Jung warned us, what we do not make conscious, we will call fate, and we will suffer it again and again. Different names, different lovers, same cycle, same silence, same secret hunger gnawing beneath the surface. Until you decide to face it, to stop playing innocent and start becoming integrated, to take responsibility, not for being perfect, but for being whole. And that means doing the hard work of digging into your childhood blueprints, of unlearning the love scripts you inherited, of asking, whose definition of loyalty have I been living? And what part of me did I silence to play that role? Because this isn't about justifying betrayal. It's about understanding it, so you can transcend it. And when you do, when you stop trying to be the good partner and start trying to be the truthful soul, you'll find something more sacred than fidelity. You'll find freedom, not the kind that runs from commitment, but the kind that elevates it. I choose you, not out of obligation, not because I'm afraid of loneliness, not to uphold some image of what love should be, but because in your presence, I have the space to be all of me. Every light, every shadow, every unspoken ache, every unfulfilled fantasy held not in secret, but in ceremony. Because now you understand, the greatest intimacy does not come from suppressing the forbidden, but from inviting it into the light, where it loses its power to sabotage. And there, in the aftermath of rupture, in the silent cathedral of your inner reckoning, you realize the faithful who cheat are not monsters. They are human beings desperate to reconnect with something inside themselves they've lost touch with. And until they do, they will keep chasing that reconnection in the arms of strangers, in the thrill of secrecy, in the illusion of passion. But once they make the unconscious conscious, once they integrate their shadow and stand in the fire of their truth, they will no longer need to betray to feel alive, because they will have become someone who can hold desire without being devoured by it. Someone who can love with both eyes open, with their darkness owned, not denied. And from that place, they will create a new kind of fidelity. Not one born of fear, but one born of freedom. A fidelity that doesn't choke the soul, but liberates it. Where devotion is not measured by how well you silence your hunger, but by how courageously you speak your truth. Where the promise is not, I'll never feel desire again, but I'll never hide from myself again. I'll never lie about who I am to make you feel secure, because in this new fidelity, faithfulness is not the absence of temptation. It's the presence of integrity, the ability to sit with your impulses to hold them in your bare hands, to examine them without judgment, and to ask the most radical question of all. What am I really seeking? Not just in them, not just in the affair, but in me. What ache am I trying to numb? What part of me have I denied for too long? What truth have I been too afraid to tell? Because once you know that truth, once you faced it, cried with it, grieved it, forgiven it, you are no longer bound to the pattern. You are free, free to build a relationship, not on illusion, but on integration, not on perfection, but on presence. And that is where love becomes something sacred, not a shield, not a script, but a mirror so honest, so revealing, that it transforms not just your relationship, but your entire way of being. So if you've strayed, or if you've been betrayed, or if you've stood on the edge of your own unconscious, wondering how someone so loyal could become so lost, know this: the affair was never the end. It was the awakening, the alarm bell your soul rang, because you stopped listening to your fire, to your fatigue, to the buried parts of you that couldn't stay silent forever. This is not about shame. This is about sight. You see it now. The shadow is not the enemy. It is your deepest ally, the guardian of the truth you've been too afraid to face. And that truth is not ugly. It is unfinished, unspoken, unintegrated, begging to become whole. So let it. Let it speak. Let it rise. Let it teach you how to love again. Not as a role, not as a duty, but as a vow born from awakening. Because real faithfulness does not come from silencing your desire. It comes from owning it, holding it, and transforming it into devotion that is not blind, but conscious. This is the new standard, the new sacred, to love in truth, to stay in integrity, to walk hand in hand with your darkness, not around it, because that is how the faithful are forged. Not in the absence of temptation, but in the presence of radical wholeness. And when you rise from that fire, you will not just be someone who stayed. You will be someone who became whole, awake, unbreakable. And that is a love the world is dying to remember.